Right on, right on.
He's back, our hockey insider, Pierre LeBrun, for our weekly chat. And Pierre, I wonder if you'd like to maybe just take a moment now, following the Four Nations face-off, which was an unqualified success on both sides of the border. You all along said it would be a success. You said the players would play hard. You never doubted it, and in the end, you were right. Now you have a chance to really puff your chest out, buddy.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that because I've been wrong about plenty other things in my life. But I will say this. It just baffled me that anyone doubted that the players were going to dig in on this. I mean, you've got players who had never played best on best who finally had their first chance, and other players like Sidney Crosby who dearly missed it for 8.5 years. Why would anyone doubt that? Honestly, it's one of the most puzzling things ever for me that people were doubting this till puck drop on that opening night. And 5 minutes into Canada, Sweden, everyone went, oh, yeah, come on, best on best.
Now, you said on Insider Trading on Tuesday that the top priority for the Edmonton Oilers heading to the trade deadline was, in fact, not goaltending. And then Stuart Skinner gave up another 4 goals in a loss to Tampa Tuesday night. And that prompted head coach Chris Knobloch to say this.
You know, we're a fragile group right now, and we just a little reluctant to play our game, and confidence is a little hard right now.
Pierre, is it fair to say that part of the lack of confidence is the fact that the goaltenders aren't playing well behind them?
I think there's a lot of blame to go around. For sure, Stuart Skinner has not been up to his standard. No one inside that Oilers organization is hiding that. But like I said on Insider Trading, they truly feel that there's no one out there that's a guaranteed upgrade. I mean, you name the guy, and sure they would look at it, but they don't believe that guy's out there in the trade market, and they point to his playoff pedigree and think that that guy will show up. Now, the problem for the Oilers right now, though, when I say share the blame, it's not just the goaltending, but they're not very good defensively at all right now. Matthias Ekholm, who's one of my favorite players in the NHL, who's been one of the sturdiest defensemen in the league, especially ever since arriving in Edmonton, has struggled of late. And by the way, this went completely unnoticed, I feel like, but he was going to be scratched by Sweden in their final game in the Four Nations. But because of the illness that was rampant in their dressing room, after being told in the morning he was a healthy scratch, he ended up playing in that game against the U.S. But I'm just making the point that, you know, Ekholm's going to rebound. He's a great player, but he's going through it. Other players, you know, this is a team-wide malaise right now for the Oilers. They got to wake up and get out of this funk, and I think they absolutely will. I would not overreact. However, historically, whenever teams are at their worst so close to the trade deadline, I always hold my breath because GMs are human. And, you know, I think the Oilers' general game plan a couple of weeks ago heading into deadline season was to maybe add another D and add, another second to third line forward, depending how, you know, what you decide to do with RNH. You can play both center and wing. But, you know, does this hammer home the urgency? Again, not so much to go out and trade for a goalie, although you never know, but I don't believe that to be their priority. But do you have to go out and maybe add a higher quality piece on the blue line than you first thought you might have needed? I don't know, but it's certainly interesting timing for Edmonton to be playing this way right now.
You addressed something on Monday in The Athletic that caught our attention, the fact that there's some talk out there, Pierre, that the Canes could maybe look to move Mikko Rantanen before the deadline if they're not able to get him signed to an extension. But you're not buying it. You're not buying it. Tell me why.
Well, listen, what I wrote is that I think it would be ridiculous for them to do it. Like, the reason the trade made sense on January 25th still makes sense today, which is that there's no guarantee they can sign Mikko Rantanen to an extension, but they just acquired the best rental player in the last 10 years in the NHL. And the East is wide open. All due respect to the Washington Capitals, who are an unbelievable story in first place, the Eastern Conference hasn't been this wide open in forever. And the reason you want to keep Mikko Rantanen, and you hope he plays better than he has since he got there, of course, but is that it is wide open and you can win. And the reason I'm not ready to say that they definitely won't trade him is because I can't predict how owner Tom Dundon will react at the end of the day if they can't get him to sign an extension by next Friday, March 7th. I mean, if the owner gets angry, all bets are off. It's his team. And if he tells GM Eric Tulsky, you got to trade Mikko Rantanen, then what are you going to do? But all things being equal and sanity prevailing, you're not going out, if you're trading Mikko Rantanen and getting equal value than what you traded for him to Colorado to begin with, you're not going out and getting a Martin Necas and a Jack Drury for a rental player. I'm sorry. That's not out there right now on March 7th. You're getting futures, maybe a young player. So in what world does it make sense? And I think the Hurricanes are a forward-thinking, smart front office. In what world does it make sense to flip him just because you're pouting that you couldn't get him to sign by next Friday? And here's the thing. He may sign. We don't know. What we know from talking to people around it is that Mikko Rantanen needs more time. And it's not even time to react to the offer that he got from the Hurricanes during the break. It's time to just say still, what do I think of Carolina? What do I think of living here long term? What do I think of this team? He needs time. He was blindsided by that trade, never saw it coming, went away for 4 nations. He just needs time. And as someone said to me this week, is March 7th enough time? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he needs more time than that. And then how does Carolina react? We'll see. But I think it's ridiculous if they move him, in my opinion.
Seth Jones would like to be moved. He's made that very clear, Pierre. He's very high on our trade bait board. His Blackhawks also lost to Utah on Tuesday night, and Jones got a lot of people's attention with what he had to say after this loss. Take a listen.
We're the exact same team right now as we were at game 1. And I think it's pretty evident out there. We haven't made any strides to be a better, more simple hockey team, you know. And it shows, you know, we don't get a lot of wins because of that.
You know, you guys and Chris Johnston specifically talked about a lot of people feel Dallas is a good fit, but this is a big contract to move, as you know, Pierre. But do you think comments like this one might speed the process along for Kyle Davidson and company?
I just don't think it works that way, Jay. I understand where you're coming from. I mean, no one wants to hear that if you're the Blackhawks front office, particularly because it was the player himself that asked for a change of scenery, and the team is trying to accommodate him. They're having talks with teams around the league. But the reality is the contract itself is the hurdle here. So regardless of his comments after a game like that, it doesn't change the fact that that's a very difficult contract to move. $9.5 million a year for the next 5 years after this season. And when you talk to teams around the league, they don't view Seth Jones anymore as a top 2 blue liner on a team. They certainly still view him as a top 4 guy who can play 20 minutes a night and is still very reliable. But he's not a $9.5 million player. He needs to have that cap hit shaved off. And the Hawks, I think, are ready to do that. But they're ready to do that if it means they actually get something tangible in a trade. And that's where it gets interesting in conversations with teams. You know, Dallas makes sense because I think they still need to shore up their right side. You know, and they've got cap room now with the injuries to do it, but they're not taking Seth Jones at $9.5 million. I couldn't even imagine that. You know, if you make him a $6.5 to $7 million player, I think he becomes a lot more appealing. But then it's, what is that value? That's a lot of money to retain for the Chicago Blackhawks over the next 5.5 years. What does that mean as part of the return? So this is far from an easy trade to pull off, whether it's Dallas or someone else, and it's why he may not move by next Friday. That might be a summer thing because of the complexity of it.
Pierre, let's talk about the Vancouver Canucks. We've been talking about the Vancouver Canucks all year for reasons that have nothing to do with Brock Boeser. It's amazing. Brock Boeser is in the final year of his contract. We've hardly talked about him because of all the JT Miller, Elias Pettersson stuff. But it's a big deal to that fan base for sure. And what's interesting to me, Pierre, is, you know, Patrick Allvin recently signed a bunch of newly acquired players to extensions. Do you think there's a chance that Boeser gets re-signed, or could he be on the move by March 7th?
I mean, listen, I think my understanding is there's still dialogue happening there, which is normal between now and the deadline between the Canucks and Brock Boeser's camp. I don't know if this one gets done. And you know, I don't know if it's just looking around and saying, you know, where is this team necessarily headed? And Brock Boeser, of course, has been there a long time. Maybe it's time for a fresh start for him. I'm not saying that's where he's at. I mean, there is still dialogue happening between the Canucks and his camp, and maybe he does sign. But I'm just telling you that we need to be ready for that possibility, that perhaps it doesn't get done by next Friday. And that's the case. The Canucks have an interesting decision to make, which is, they're fighting for a playoff spot, but can they risk losing him for nothing July 1st if he's not signed by next Friday? And do they decide to move him for assets? So really, it's crunch time for the Canucks on that file. It's crunch time for Montreal and Jake Evans. It's crunch time for Columbus and Ivan Provorov. There are a lot of teams in a tough situation that have to make a call here in the next 8-9 days, and they're not easy decisions.
And we're going to finish up with the Boston Bruins. Their GM, Don Sweeney, said not too long ago, Pierre, he thought this would be a quieter deadline for them. They're still fighting for a wild card spot. Brad Marchand is in the final year of his deal. There's been talks. He's said he wants to stay, but Sweeney's also said he's been taking calls on his veteran. I guess my point here is there a real possibility, Pierre, that Brad Marchand could be on the move by March 7th?
There is a possibility. It's probably not the likeliest possibility, but it is a possibility for a couple of reasons. One, they are trying to sign him. That's the priority right now for Boston. They'd like to extend their captain. But again, as we just talked about with Brock Boeser, what if it doesn't get done by next Friday? Then there's the fact that Brad Marchand has a modified no-trade list. So he has some control over what happens here. Not full control, but certainly some control. And that's not nothing, because he came out publicly this week and said, I don't want to get traded. Now, again, it's not totally up to him, but is somewhat up to him. So this is one of those classic situations where the Bruins want to sign him. This could go to the 11th hour, but if they don't get him signed, do they do the unthinkable because they don't feel they're going to make the playoffs? The reality is the Bruins are right there still in the thick of it. So that's a real gut check call if you're Don Sweeney. And I think what the GM of the Bruins meant when he said this might be a quieter deadline is not so much that they won't be doing anything, because they could be doing some selling. But it's just that they don't see themselves as buyers, of course, being a bubble team for the first time in a long time, which makes sense.
Pierre, that's a very comfy couch behind you. I think you should get some rest, because the next week and a half for you is going to be intense leading up to the deadline. Are you ready? Are you ready to go?
Right on is what I'd say to that, Jay. I'm ready for it.
There it is. Pierre LeBrun, we love having him on the show. Don't forget, Pierre will be a massive part of our Trade Center coverage March the 7th, along with Chris Johnston and Darren Dreger. It's brought to you by Harvey's, and it's Canada's #1 trade deadline show.